This time, I would like to introduce a topic that is not widely known in Japan, the housing situation in China. I will present an article about a housing collapse accident that occurred this past May. In Anhui Province, a 5-story apartment building suddenly collapsed. From the photos of the scene, you can see that part of the building has completely collapsed. Unfortunately, there were casualties in this accident. This issue is not limited to this building alone but is like a ticking time bomb for housing conditions throughout China. It's almost certain that similar accidents will happen again. But no one knows where. Although the problem is recognized, sufficient measures have not yet been taken. In China, this is called the housing deterioration problem. Currently, at least 16 million households live in buildings that are over 25 years old. This is a conservative estimate, and the actual number is believed to be even higher. Many migrant workers have moved to urban areas, but the authorities do not know exactly where they are living. The majority of these 16 million households have lived in cities for many years, and the local governments are aware of them. Of these, 180,000 households live in buildings over 75 years old. In Japan, a lot of information is shared about China's real estate. Chinese developers have built properties far exceeding the population, resulting in a crisis in the real estate industry. New development projects are not selling, and developers are unable to make a profit. The problems in the real estate sector don't end there. Banks that have lent to developers are also struggling. Developers have borrowed funds from the general public through bonds and other financial instruments, many of which have become non-performing loans. The real estate crisis in China is far from over, and the real estate sector will need to recover for a soft landing to be achieved. However, housing prices in China continue to fall. What I want to point out here is that while there is an oversupply of housing in China, at least 16 million households are living in deteriorating buildings. This mismatch is obvious. In a communist country, one might think that surplus housing could be allocated to those living in deteriorating homes, but in reality, China is a very capitalist society. Without money, you cannot buy a new apartment. As a result, many people live in old, deteriorating housing while real estate remains unused. If these old buildings were still comfortable to live in, it might not be a big issue, but in reality, they have many problems. Returning to the earlier example, the building that collapsed in Anhui Province was handed over to residents about 20 years ago. At the time of its collapse, the building was over 25 years old. There were significant safety concerns, and in addition, the living environment was poor. Contrary to the image many Japanese people might have, many of the old buildings are located in economically developed cities. For example, there are many such buildings in Shanghai, even in the city center. Some buildings in Shanghai are over 75 years old. These old houses were built before the spread of automobiles, so the roads are narrow. For example, there is a famous tourist spot called Yu Garden in Shanghai, and right next to it is an old residential area. Most of the buildings have iron bars on the windows for security, as there are many burglaries, even on the upper floors. However, these older buildings lack such features, and due to their old window designs, it is difficult to ensure security. The roofs of old buildings often leak, and some are on the verge of collapse, with residents propping them up with temporary supports. When I lived in China, there was a leak from the ceiling in a high-rise apartment I stayed in. The problem originated several floors above, caused by deteriorating infrastructure and poor construction. Additionally, these buildings have very poor insulation. In the summer, they are unbearably hot, and in the winter, they are freezing cold. The winters in Shanghai are surprisingly cold, and even when the heater is on full blast, it doesn't help. Poor insulation also impacts energy efficiency, which contradicts China's push for environmental reforms, such as the adoption of electric vehicles, EVs. Improving the insulation of housing could significantly reduce energy consumption and carbon emissions, but these issues are being left unaddressed. In conclusion, even in major cities like Shanghai, there are many old, deteriorating buildings, and many people are still living in them. These residents take pride in being original urban dwellers, but despite the city's economic growth, their living conditions have not improved. With China's economy now peaking, there is little chance that these housing problems will be resolved anytime soon. It is predicted that by 2040, 80% of China's housing will be over 25 years old. In Japan, a 25-year-old building is still livable, but in China, there are often fundamental issues with construction quality. For example, as with the building that collapsed in Anhui Province, some structures collapse after only 20 years. For many Chinese people, living in deteriorating and unsafe housing is an urgent crisis. Meanwhile, China continues to build more housing than necessary, further deepening the economic contradictions. That's all for today. See you in the next video.